Hello, my name is Gary, and I was raised in the Western United States, so I'm a native English speaker. I hope that you will enjoy this YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us.
The Tale of Jasper Jay by author Scott Bailey, 1877-1949. Chapter 1, A Noisy Rogue. Some of the birds in Pleasant Valley claimed that old Mr. Crow was the loudest in the neighborhood, but they must have forgotten about Mr. Crow's mischievous cousin, Jasper Jay. And it wasn't just in the summer that Jasper's squawking and laughter echoed through the valley. Since he spent his winters in Farmer Green's young pine trees near the base of Blue Mountain, many cold mornings began with Jasper's piercing cry of, "Jay, Jay," ringing through the frosty air. During that time of year, Jasper often visited the farm buildings, hoping to find a few kernels of corn near the corn crib, but it didn't seem to matter much whether he found food or not. If he spotted the cat outside, he had a grand time teasing her, which he thoroughly enjoyed. Jasper was bold, lively, and mischievous, but undeniably handsome. Farmer Green enjoyed watching him flint around the bare trees in his bright blue feathers on bleak mornings. Still, Farmer Green was well aware that Jasper Jay was a troublemaker. "He reminds me of a naughty boy," Johnny Green's father remarked one day. "He's mischievous, destructive, and constantly screeching and whistling. But somehow, I can't help liking him. Maybe it's because he always seems to have so much fun." "He steals birds' eggs in the summer," Johnny pointed out. "I've known boys to do that," his father replied. Johnny didn't say anything else, perhaps because he was busy watching Jasper Jay in the orchard, already helping himself to frozen apples still clinging to the branches. When warm weather arrived, life got even better for Jasper. He feasted on insects and fruit, and while he happily took his share of Farmer Green's strawberries, currants, and blackberries, he also did some good by devouring moths that could damage the grapes. In the fall, however, Jasper had a single obsession: nuts. He adored them as long as the shells weren't too thick. Beech nuts, chestnuts, and acorns were his favorites, and he was exceptionally skilled at cracking them. With his strong feet gripping the nut and his sharp beak splitting the shell, Jasper could crack open a beech nut faster than Johnny Green could smash a butternut with a hammer. Though Jasper hated to spend his precious nut-eating time doing much else, he couldn't resist hiding nuts for the winter. He tucked them into cracks, crevices, and under piles of leaves. Like Frisky Squirrel, Jasper believed in preparing for winter, but without a hollow tree to store his collection, he often forgot where he had hidden many of his nuts. Those forgotten nuts sometimes sprouted into trees, helping Farmer Green in unexpected ways. Of course, if anyone had pointed that out to Jasper, he probably would have laughed his loudest, "Jay," in disbelief. Chapter 2, A Blow for the Bully. Jasper Jay had some strange ideas. One of them was that no one could be truly happy unless they were making a lot of noise. And if there was one thing that made Jasper furious, it was seeing some quiet, humble neighbor who minded their own business and stayed out of trouble. One such neighbor lived in a wild grapevine that grew on the stone wall in front of the farmhouse. His name was Mr. Chippy, and he was never known to hurt anyone. In fact, he was quite helpful to Farmer Green's wife, often visiting the farmhouse to clean up crumbs from the kitchen doorstep. But Jasper Jay complained that Mr. Chippy was too quiet. "He never says anything except chip, chip, chip," Jasper would say, "and his voice is so high and thin, he sounds like a little old lady. He's far too quiet to get anywhere in life, and I doubt he's ever had any fun." Jasper often said unpleasant things about mild Mr. Chippy. One day, when he had nothing better to do, he flew over to the stone wall just to give Mr. Chippy a piece of his mind. "Hey there, Redhead," Jasper shouted. "Come out here on the wall. I want to see you." Mr. Chippy poked his chestnut-colored head through the leaves of the grapevine. He didn't exactly look thrilled. Like most creatures, he wasn't too fond of Jasper's visits, but he climbed up onto the stone wall and gave a polite "How do you do" to his caller. "That's no way to greet someone," Jasper Jay said rudely. "If you want to make a person feel welcome, you should speak up, slap him on the back, and look happy." Mr. Chippy smiled faintly, but Jasper wasn't satisfied. "You don't look happy," he scoffed. "You look like you've got a pain somewhere. Come on, let me hear you laugh." Had Mr. Chippy known that Jasper wouldn't be so rude, he would have stayed hidden in the grapevine. Now he wished Jasper would leave him in peace. There was nothing funny about the situation. You better do as I say, Jasper warned, raising his crest and stomping angrily on the stone wall. You're way too quiet. I want to hear a loud laugh from you. Jasper added, you're going to be happy, even if I have to break every bone in your body. Naturally, the threat only made Mr. Chippy more nervous. He knew Jasper was a bully, and he wasn't sure what the loud, blue-feathered troublemaker might do to someone as small as him. So he tried his best to make Jasper happy. But his nerves got the better of him, and all he managed was a weak chip, chip, chip. That won't do, Jasper declared. Maybe this will, said Mr. Chippy. Calmly, without warning, he darted at Jasper and knocked him off the stone wall. Jasper Jay was furious. He quickly scrambled back up onto the wall, but Mr. Chippy had vanished. He dived back into the grapevine and had hidden in a crack between the stones, where Jasper couldn't find him. I can't believe it, Jasper said finally. He got away. He shook his head and flew off, never imagining that quiet Mr. Chippy would ever have the nerve to knock anyone off a wall. It's clear that Jasper Jay had never learned that bravery doesn't always come with boasting. As he flew off toward the river, he heard something from the deep in the wild grapevine. It was Mr. Chippy, chuckling to himself. In the end, Jasper had made him happy, just not in the way he had intended. Chapter 3, The Strange Cry. As you might already know, Jasper Jay was a pretty vain guy, and it wasn't just his bright blue feathers that made him proud. He also loved the sound of his own voice, even though many of the other birds found it harsh and unpleasant. But maybe that was because they rarely heard Jasper's softer, sweeter notes, or the low chatter he reserved for his closest friends. What most people knew and didn't like was Jasper's loud JJ cry. But even that noisy sound suited Jasper just fine. He often boasted that no other bird in Pleasant Valley could make as much of a racket as he could. Sure, there was his cousin, old Mr. Crow. His caw-caw could be heard half a mile away if the wind was right, but Jasper was always quick to claim his own voice was much stronger than Mr. Crow's, and no one bothered to argue with him. So Jasper Jay didn't have much to worry about until one day something happened that made him feel uneasy. It was a hot summer afternoon, and Jasper was resting under the shade of a beech tree on the edge of the woods, watching Farmer Green, his son Johnny, and the farmhand working in the hayfield. Jasper was thinking about how much easier and more carefree his life was compared to theirs when a long, loud call echoed across the meadow. He never heard that sound before, and he stood up, listening carefully as it bounced back and forth across the valley. Jasper waited quietly for a while, hoping to hear the call again, but it didn't come. I wonder what kind of bird that was, he thought. If he stays around here, I'll have to chase him off, because his voice is definitely louder than mine. I won't let anyone come here and outdo me like that. The whole afternoon, Jasper flew back and forth across the valley, searching for the strange bird with the loud voice. But he didn't find anyone new. Jasper almost convinced himself that the strange bird had just been passing through the valley. He hoped so because he had no idea how big the bird was. If it was big as his voice, chasing it away wouldn't be easy for Jasper. By nightfall, he was starting to feel better, but he did have a weird dream about meeting a giant bird at the top of Blue Mountain, who chased him around the world. When he woke up just before dawn, he was still a little scared, and he realized it had only been a dream. It must have been that fuzzy caterpillar I ate before bed, he thought. Jasper was back to his usual self the next morning. He had fun teasing a kitten that had gotten stuck behind the Farmer Green's barn. He also drove Mrs. Jolly Robin crazy by hiding in the orchard and whistling like a hawk. But by noon, his fun was ruined. He heard the strange scream again, and Jasper trembled, both angry and frightened. He knew for sure now that the mysterious bird was still in the valley. Chapter 4, Jasper's Boast. Jasper Jay hadn't told anyone about the horrible call that had sounded twice, both times around noon. But now he was sure that the strange bird whose cry he heard had come to live in Pleasant Valley. He couldn't keep quiet any longer. The next morning, Jasper ran into his cousin, Mr. Crow, and decided to stop and talk. You see, Mr. Crow was known as quite the gossip. He easily knew what was happening in the neighborhood, so Jasper thought he might know something about the unwelcome newcomer. Maybe Jasper thought the old guy has already seen him. Of course, Jasper didn't call his cousin a guy to his face. He always addressed him politely as Mr. Crow, despite their close family ties. There was a reason for that. Mr. Crow had once given Jasper a pretty harsh beating when he called him something else, and Jasper never forgot it. Jasper first asked how Mr. Crow was doing, hoping to put him in a good mood, but he quickly regretted starting that conversation. It turned out the old fellow was dealing with gout, hay fever, and a bad knee. He was more than happy to talk about his health problems. Since he lived alone, he complained that he didn't have anyone to do his housework, and that was what was bothering his knee. Jasper grew impatient as Mr. Crow went on about his ailments, and Jasper really wasn't interested in hearing it. Yeah, he interrupted impatiently. Now that we've got some nice weather, you should start feeling better. But what's the news, Mr. Crow? Have you heard anything interesting lately? Mr. Crow shook his head. Things are quiet, he said. Nobody's left Pleasant Valley recently, Jasper asked. Not that I know of, said Mr. Crow. No new neighbors, Jasper asked, getting to the point. No one at all, said Mr. Crow. That's strange, Jasper said. I could have sworn I heard a new voice yesterday, and I heard it again today, exactly at noon. What did it sound like? Mr. Crow asked. Jasper then imitated the strange cry that had echoed through the valley. It was loud and really unpleasant to hear, he said. And whoever this bird is, if he's going to keep bothering me like that every day at noon, when I'm trying to rest, I'll have to chase him out of here. It's almost noon now, said Mr. Crow, glancing at the sun. Maybe we'll hear the cry again. Barely had the words left his beak when the loud call rang out again, catching both their attention. Jasper immediately stood on tiptoe and stretched his neck, eager to see the stranger who had such a powerful voice. There it is, Jasper exclaimed. That's the call again. Do you know what kind of bird makes that sound? Mr. Crow seemed to choke, splutter, and cough. He couldn't answer right away, but after the echoing sound died down, he finally spoke. No small bird can make a noise like that, he said, and if you can drive him out of Pleasant Valley, you're a better fighter than I thought. Jasper didn't like the sound of that. He gave his cousin an angry glare and looked like he might want to pick a fight. But he had already been beaten up by Mr. Crow once and didn't want to go through that again. So instead of fighting, he sneered and then shouted loudly, I'll find that noisy bird and chase him out of here, even if it takes all summer. He puffed up his chest, snapped his beak, and stamped his feet, looking as fierce as he could. But Mr. Crow wasn't scared at all. He just smiled. Let me know when you chase the stranger off, he said. Oh, you'll hear about it, Jasper said proudly. It'll be the biggest fight this valley has ever seen, he boasted. Then the two cousins went their separate ways. Jasper was in a worse mood after hearing Mr. Crow's rough laugh echoing through the valley. Of course, Jasper had no idea what his cousin was laughing at, but that only made him even more irritated. Chapter 5, The Search. After telling Mr. Crow what he had planned to do to the strange bird, one he had never seen but only heard, Jasper Jay resumed his search for the mysterious newcomer. There wasn't a shred of doubt in Jasper's mind that this stranger could outscream him, and as long as such a loud rival remained in the area, Jasper knew he wouldn't be able to rest. At the very least, Jasper hoped the newcomer wasn't too big. He can't be that large, or I have spotted him by now, he assured himself. Jasper searched everywhere, peering into hollow trees, scanning the tallest branches, and combing through dense thickets, but there was no sign of his rival. To Jasper, the unknown bird was already an enemy. For several days, Jasper kept up his fruitless search. Every noon, the strange, piercing cry would fill him with rage, but he was no closer to figuring out where it came from. He asked many of the local birds if they had seen a stranger around, but none of them admitted to it. Jasper found their silence deeply suspicious. In the meantime, Jasper made a point to avoid his cousin, old Mr. Crow, whenever he spotted him. He hadn't forgotten Mr. Crow's sarcastic comment. Still, the day finally came when Jasper ran into him in the woods. Mr. Crow called out loudly for him to stop. I wanted to ask, said the old bird, his voice cracking with amusement. Have you found and chased off that stranger yet? Mr. Crow rocked back and forth as he spoke, clearly enjoying himself. I haven't laid eyes on him yet, Jasper replied coolly, but I hear him every noon. I'm sure I'll find him soon. Have you looked around the farmhouse? Mr. Crow asked. No, I haven't thought of that, Jasper admitted. Well, if I were you, I'd go there right away. Wait until noon, and I think your search will be over. Unless I'm wrong, which I doubt, you'll find what you're looking for." He paused before adding with a sly grin, "I just hope you don't get hurt when you fight him." Mr. Crow's cryptic comment left Jasper feeling uneasy. It seemed like the old bird knew more about the stranger than he was letting on. The way he smirked and croaked made Jasper downright suspicious. "Won't you come with me?" Jasper asked, politely, hiding his growing anxiety. Now that he was about to confront the mysterious bird, he felt more nervous than ever. He didn't look forward to the idea of facing it alone. "I can't right now," Mr. Crow replied. "I'm busy, but I'll join you on the barnyard fence a little before noon. Maybe I'll bring a friend or two along." "That sounds great," Jasper said, trying to sound braver than he felt. They said their goodbyes, and Mr. Crow hurried off into the woods, claiming he had important matters to attend to. Chapter 6. A Joke on Jasper Jay. With a loud squawk of excitement, Jasper Jay darted off toward the farm buildings. Knowing he had company later made him feel much better. He decided to stay well hidden in the top of the great oak near Farmer Green's house until Mr. Crow and possibly his friends arrived. Jasper waited in the big oak for what felt like ages. He didn't spot the strange bird, which was a relief. He had no desire to face it without Mr. Crow by his side. For once in his life, Jasper kept perfectly still. From his perch, he watched a kitten playing in the yard and felt tempted to tease it. He also noticed the hens and smiled at the thought of how they'd scatter if he mimicked the hawk's cry. But he kept quiet, worried that the mysterious bird might be lurking nearby, ready to swoop in when Jasper least expected it. At last, Jasper left his hiding spot and flew beyond the barn, landing on the fence to meet Mr. Crow. The old bird arrived on time, bringing 10 of his rowdy relatives with him. They were noisy and bold, knowing Farmer Green, Johnny, and the hired man were all busy in the hayfield. "Here we are," called Mr. Crow. "We've come to watch you take on that loud stranger and drive him out of the valley." His relations joined in with a raucous laughter. "What's so funny?" Jasper asked, narrowing his eyes. "Oh, nothing yet," said Mr. Crow with a sly grin. The crows burst into laughter again. "Come on, let's move to the other side of the barn. It's nearly time for the stranger to screech." The group moved to a different part of the fence, with a clear view of the farmhouse. Just as they settled, Farmer Green's wife stepped into the doorway, lifted a horn to her lips, and blew a loud, piercing blast. Startled, Jasper nearly fell off the fence, but instead of being scared, he was furious, especially when Mr. Crow and his relatives burst into teasing laughter. "Go on, attack her," said Mr. Crow. "She's the loud bird you're supposed to chase out of Pleasant Valley. We're all here to watch." Jasper burned with humiliation. He mistaken the sound of the dinner horn for the call of a strange bird. Feeling utterly foolish, he gave a loud, frustrated scream and darted back toward the woods. "Look at those crows chasing that blue jay," Farmer Green said to Johnny as they walked home. "I bet he's been up to some mischief." But for once, Jasper wasn't to blame. The real trickster was old Mr. Crow, who had known all along that Farmer Green's wife had bought a new dinner horn to call them in from the fields. How Mr. Crow learned about the horn remained a mystery. He always seemed to know everything happening in Pleasant Valley, and now Jasper Jay had learned something new too. Chapter 7. Scaring the Hens. Jasper Jay had a peculiar hobby that he enjoyed far too much. He loved mimicking the calls of other birds. He was such a talented mimic that he often managed to fool his neighbors with his tricks. It wasn't exactly enjoyable for an older, hard-working bird to return home after a long day, only to be scolded by his wife. "You can't deny it. I heard you laughing in the woods," she might exclaim. Convincing her that the laughter was actually Jasper Jay's doing, and not his own, was no easy task. Jasper didn't stop at teasing his neighbors either. Sometimes he'd hide in a tree near the farm and frighten the hens by perfectly imitating the cry of a red-shouldered hawk, a bird that lived in the nearby woods by Black Creek, where frogs were abundant. The sharp scream of "Kee-you, was all it took to send a mother hen scurrying to gather her chicks and rush them into the coop. Even though the red-shouldered hawk usually hunted frogs and field mice rather than poultry, no cautious hen wanted to take any risk. Jasper found their frantic reactions endlessly entertaining and never tired of the prank. Surprisingly, Jasper's hawk impression sometimes fooled Farmer Green as well. On those occasions, the farmer would grab his old rifle from above the fireplace and rush outside, hoping to catch the supposed hawk in the act. Eventually, word of Jasper's tricks reached the real red-shouldered hawk. The hawk, understandably annoyed, complained to Mr. Crow, a notorious gossip in the woods. "Jasper, you better be careful," Mr. Crow warned one day. "Mr. Hawk isn't happy. Farmer Green's started calling him Hen Hawk and has been looking to shoot him. And trust me, having someone after you with a gun is no fun." "I'd know." Jasper, however, just burst into laughter. "You won't be laughing when Mr. Hawk gets his claws on you," Mr. Crow snapped, clearly irritated. That only made Jasper laugh harder. Jasper even mocked Mr. Crow by mimicking his raspy voice, cawing, caw, caw, so perfectly that Mr. Crow bristled with anger. For a moment, it seemed like he might lose his temper and drive Jasper out of the woods entirely. The two rarely saw eye to eye. Though they were cousins, their relationship was strained, perhaps because they knew too much about each other. "Don't worry about me," Jasper said confidently. "Fine," Mr. Crow replied, clearly miffed, "but don't say I didn't warn you." With that, Mr. Crow flew off to his nest in the tall elm tree overlooking the cornfield.